All right, I think I want to go ahead and get started. I know Ricardo's coming, but we do have quorum without him. So let's go ahead and do the roll call, and he'll join us as soon as he can.
Ricardo Diaz, Scott Dossett,
Here.
Mikhail Levinsky, Mikhail. I know he's here.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
And Scott is here too. Did you hear him?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Megan McGinty,
Here.
Daryl Price,
Here.
Okay, very good. Quorum. Is there a motion to?
Hey, Mikhail, it seems like your connection is kind of iffy. You're kind of coming in and out, just so you know.
I'll try to move. Okay, the internet should be better here. Is there a motion to either change the agenda or to approve the agenda?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we need a roll call.
Ricardo Diaz, Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Mikhail Levinsky,
Yes?
Megan McGinty,
Yes.
Daryl Price.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to, I guess I'll address the public in regard to public comment.
Ricardo is here.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, welcome, Ricardo. So we're going to do public comment a little differently today. In our last meeting, we started what I intend to be a regular practice of having public comment be both at the beginning and at the end of the meeting. Today, it's a special meeting, and most of it will be dedicated to a guest speaker who will lead us through a training on police use of force policy. In order to respect the guest speaker's time and not have a lot of public comment in the beginning, and also in order to allow the public to interact more with the guest speaker, what Ricardo and I decided to do is to move public comment at the end after the guest speaker is done and create space for essentially a Q&A with the speaker, with Mike Schlosser. So we're going to hold off on public comment now, get through just a few minutes of essentially updates, old business, and then we'll move right into the main part of the agenda, which will be the use of force training. Okay, so unfinished business. We have an update on the state of the current open appeals. I'm going to go ahead and do that, Ricardo, unless you want to jump in here.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So on Friday, Ricardo and I met with city staff to go through all of the open appeals. There are a handful, maybe together approaching, I don't have an exact number, but we were looking at maybe 10 or 12. All of the appeals come from two individuals, and we are in dialogue with both of them. The update to the board and to the public is in the case of one person submitting the appeals, both appeals have to do with Aaliyah Lewis, and based on the city ordinance, we are not able to review that appeal right now for a number of reasons. One, there's an ongoing investigation, and the CPRB generally engages in a review process after an investigation is over. So that's reason one. The second reason is that the ordinance prohibits us from engaging in a review if there is an outstanding, if there are either criminal or civil suits that are either in progress or a threat of a lawsuit. And I'm informed that that is the case. So my intention is for us to revisit this and look at the appeals again after the independent investigation has concluded, and to see if there's any reason for us to review the outcomes of that. But at this point, there's just no way for us to take that up. The other complaints, we are also in dialogue with the person submitting them. All of the complaints have already, we've responded, and the city has responded to the substance of the complaints through a number of policy changes. So in some ways, you know, for us, the purpose of the complaint is to bring those issues to our attention, to the city's attention, to see if the policy as it exists makes sense. And since we've amended the policy accordingly, I'm not sure what we can do with the complaints, but it might be that we'll still go ahead and have the appeal hearing so that there's, you know, just a way of creating more accountability and then, you know, some transparency about the process. So that's the update. If there are questions from the board, I'm happy to take them now. If there are questions from the public, we'll have time for that at the end of the session today.
Mikhail?
Yeah.
Just a quick note for the benefit of the audience that there are complaints that have been submitted to the board for review that lie beyond these two cases that have been kind of put through the system. So I didn't do a count before we got here, but I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are being processed pretty much normally that lie outside the domain of the two that you mentioned, correct?
Scott, I'm referring to appeals, not complaints.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, these are all of the appeals that
Okay.
as of Friday, we had.
Right. Okay, appeals. Sorry, gotcha.
Yes, Carol.
I just want to make sure to remind you to inquire of your colleagues whether or not they would be amenable to a daytime hearing in order to kind of knock out a chunk of these, and that would be before school starts.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. So assuming that we go forward with the appeals hearing, because there are multiple appeals about similar issues and multiple appeals from a single person. One of the things we thought we might do in order to create a more efficient process for all of us is to see if we can have not necessarily a full day, but rather than doing in the evening, see if we can find a day in August before the school year starts when we can get through the entire batch. So the question is the board open to such a process, or should we look for multiple evenings in which to do it? And I'm going to be right back. Sorry.
Ricardo, we're not hearing you. At least I am not hearing you. I don't know if your volume's down low.
Thank you. Then I'll switch. So there are several things that have to line up in order to have appeals heard as a group. One, we need to get the external person, I forget what their title is, but it is a legal referee. What's it called, McIntyre?
It's a hearing officer.
The hearing officer. We have to line up also resources within the city for the city people to be present and to be taking notes and all that. we have also the complainant that has to also fall into that same schedule, and then there's all of us. We're not last on the list, of course, but it's a juggling act. And then if we see all the appeals one by one sequentially, we would end up with quite a long. It's not just the amount of hours; it is that we would be then piecing things that are actually overlapping, and so putting out the request for you to also consider if we could consolidate also sets a better situation for us to then look for a hearing officer and the other resources to also be consolidated. And of course, this is all pending also the complainant to also agree. So there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of people to involve, and that's why we were looking for efficiency's sake. Because ultimately what we want is to hear through and address the complaints. It is not necessarily in pieces, although some of the complaints are very, can be circumscribed. So anyway, that's what we're putting before you, because as we looked at the long list, it's everybody's time coinciding as much as the amount of coinciding that has to be done in order to carry them out. So for right now, that's the proposal. It depends also not just beyond us, but if we can align ourselves with the possibility, then we can go forward on aligning the other pieces, hopefully. I
Yes,
think you're in charge, Micaiah.
Yeah, before we get into this discussion, I think we have to, at least I feel like we have to answer the question which was put to us in private communication by an appellate as to whether or not the board, trained as it is sitting at a body that can hear the appeal. Don't know whether you guys all remember the email that we all received, but we have been through an appeal recently which was directly put in question vis-a-vis the lack of training that the board had done. So I want an explicit understanding that we are not going to spend all this time organizing something that we are then going to be called to task to repeat. Particularly concerned given the update that we received today that we may have new members coming onto the board, or at least that there are interviews for vacancies. So I'm not interested in going forward with an appeals hearing at all until we answer that question.
Yeah, I can answer it. Also, I really want to be mindful of time. We have Mike, and I told him we needed about 15 minutes before we were ready for him, but we're right at that mark now. I've consulted with city staff who have consulted in turn with the city attorneys. We are of one mind that that the board, as it stood in past years and in past months, actually, can I ask everybody to mute their microphone? Okay, thank you. There was a lot of feedback coming, and now it's stopped. That the board, as it was constituted, was sufficiently trained, and our appeal hearings would stand, and that what, in the last few months, we are essentially engaged in revisiting, rethinking, and rebooting the CPRB in terms of making sure that the training is what we want it to be, and the role of the CPRB is what the community wants it to be. And so that's all appropriate, but it doesn't invalidate anything that we've done in the past. Here's what I propose, because I really want to respect Mike's time. We have one more update. I suggest we move it to the end of the agenda so that we can get Mike in now. And if we don't get to this item, I think it's also okay, right? Like we can have an update in writing without using up the meeting time. Okay. All right. So very good. So with that, let me introduce Mike Schlosser, Dr. Mike Schlosser, who did his PhD after a full career in law enforcement. For those of you who don't know Mike, he's the director of the Police Training Institute on campus, which trains not only the recruits, is that the right language, Mike?
Yes, sir.
Yep, in the Urbana Police Department, but in many of the local police departments, right?
Correct.
And so the use of force policy that he'll be sharing with us might vary a little bit, and I'm sure Mike will say a little bit about that from department to department, but there are also a lot of commonalities, and one of the commonalities is that almost everybody is likely to have been trained by Mike and his staff at the Police Training Institute. So thanks for making time for us, Mike. I really, really appreciate it. I know it's a busy time for you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm here. I'm happy to help out and hopefully provide some education to everyone on use of force. I think we also have to keep in mind that this will be an overview, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. But when we train our recruit officers, or when I go to the area agencies and train them again, especially at our academy, the recruit officers will get hours and hours of use of force training, 50 some hours of control tactics to be able to apply those in the right way, and dozens of scenarios. So there's a lot to training what they get. So the idea for me today this evening will be to give you an idea of just some basic use of force concepts, and I will bring in how we train them. And I will also bring in a couple of the most important court cases that help determine whether or not a use of force incident is excessive or not excessive. So am I allowed to share my screen? Have I been given that permission, or do I need to do something else?
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. I bet it's down here where it says share screen.
You cracked the code. You got it.
I'm not seeing what I want though. Let's see. It's not. It's not. Hang on. Use force. All right, you guys are seeing things that I thought I deleted, and my PowerPoint's down here, so.
Right now, we're not seeing anything.
Okay,
So if you click the share screen button on the bottom there, it should bring up another pop-up window that allows you to choose what part you want to share, which I think you're sharing a PowerPoint. So you'll click on that PowerPoint and then click OK.
yeah, my PowerPoint's not coming up. All right, 10:12. That means standby and police talk. Panelists, all panelists. All right, don't give up on me.
While he does the technical side, I just want to, I don't know, help frame. We are going through a lot of training. This one's being recorded. When new people come on, this is part of their training. One of the categories that we'd like to keep track of is use of force. If so, what type? As we are reviewing, police interventions in the community. And what gets me is, oh, he's coming on. Yep. I just didn't know what their instructions were. And there have been times in which because I didn't know, I jumped to conclusions myself. a lot of this stuff is coming from their training, and so they respond according to the training, but maybe against my estimate. And so as we all share and standardize what we know, we can at least argue as to whether something was in the list or not, but not whether it was, whether it was right or wrong, given that the policeman is going to follow whatever their training was. Thank you.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen now? Okay, that made my day, actually. Okay. All right. I'm going to start with what we call the use of force scale. And the use of force scale is an excellent learning tool. Of course, it needs to be combined with different scenario-based training. And the way I'm going to explain this is a lot of people use of force continuums. And this is very similar to a continuum, going from cooperative person all the way to a deadly force situation. And we use a scale because the goal is to keep the use of force in balance with whatever resistance or the arrestee is getting. And we know that it's impossible, and a lot of people don't understand this, to keep the scale exactly or completely balanced. And by that, I mean things happen quickly. Officers have to make split-second decisions. Things happen suddenly, but we need to keep it very reasonable in scale. It would be impossible to tell an officer and train them like a robot to say, if somebody does this, you do this. If somebody does this, you do this. But we need to be within proper guidelines, and it needs to be something a reasonable officer would do. So I just wanted to get that out of the way to begin with. But I'm going to start at the bottom of the scale, and I'm going to go through each of the different types of arrestees we might have. And then I'm going to explain what options are available to the officer. And then I'm going to explain that within each category, you may have some things in that category that are or aren't reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances. And that should make more sense a little bit later. So we're going to start with the cooperative person. And I'm just going to use plain language for this. I think that's the simplest way to do it. I'm kind of a plain talking guy anyway. But if we have a cooperative arrestee, then we still have to do certain tactics. And I think it's important for a lot of people. I wish there was a national database on use of force along with, along with the deadly force situations. I would love to have that, but we don't have that. But there's numerous studies out there with very large sample sizes. And really, it's depending on what you read, you're going to get a variation to somewhere around 80 to 87% of all arrests are made with no force necessary at all. And so I think we need to keep that into perspective. And I'm not downplaying the excessive force, because that's what we are trying to prevent for sure. But if we're talking about a cooperative person, they're simply doing what we're asking them to do. If I tell somebody they're under arrest and everything I ask them to do, they get into that position so that I can handcuff them. But a lot of people might not understand, well, should I go hands-on with a cooperative person? And it kind of sometimes might vary from situation to situation. But a lot of times you might see an officer arresting somebody that's cooperative. And I usually like to do these live because I can kind of animate what I'm talking about a little bit better. But if I have a cooperative person, I can still go hands-on and just think of me forcing their arm behind the back, and they're letting me do it because they're cooperating. And I'm getting that arm behind the back, and I'm getting the wrist, and that kind of wrist is kind of over and up. I'm causing no pain. I haven't gone beyond their normal limitation of flexibility, but I'm in a position there that if the person started to resist, I can simply move the arm over and up for a little more control and do some wrist manipulation for a little bit of pain compliance and start giving my commands, please, sir, stop resisting, get your other hand behind your back. A lot of people resist at the early stages. They may be cooperative, and then once they realize they're going to be arrested, or they realize, hey, the cuffs are going on, they're ready to resist. And at that point, if I'm already in a position where I can simply do one little move to get control, do pain compliance and get them to comply, If I'm already in that position, it's less likely to end up with an all-out brawl. It's less likely to end up with them fleeing from me. So we are preparing in each situation where I will not be applying any pain to a cooperative person, but I can still put them in a position so that if they do, I'm ready. I'm less likely to get injured. They're less likely to get injured. And that's a lot of times where bad things can happen. So we prepare ourselves for that. So some of the tactics might be that I am placing a person in a certain control hold without pain. And another tactic obviously is I'm placing handcuffs on somebody. And when I place handcuffs on somebody, we check them for proper fit to make sure they're not too tight, but make sure they're going to stay on their hands. And then we always double lock the handcuffs. And a lot of people don't know this, but there's double lock mechanisms on handcuffs. And these double lock mechanisms, once you get them on proper, it keeps them from going any tighter. So that when I'm placing somebody in a squad car to transport and they sit back, the cuffs aren't going to get any tighter on them. So then we will, before we place them in the squad car, another tactic is we search somebody. We don't want somebody getting in the back of a squad car that could have a weapon on them. I mean, if somebody even has like a pocket knife or something, that's not illegal, but we don't want them to have anything on them that's going to hurt themselves or potential to hurt the officer. We want to keep them safe and us safe. So a cooperative person is basically doing everything you ask of them. And do you want to go questions in between the things, Mikhail, or okay? So then we come up to what we call a passive resistor. And this is pretty simple, I think. So if I have somebody that's a passive resistor, they're not resisting, but they're not doing what I'm asking them to do. So again, there's still tactics that I can use on them. I'm not going to use any pain compliance, any pressure points, any pepper spray or anything like that on a passive resistor because they're passive. And if they, let's say I have somebody standing and I'm getting ready to arrest them and they're not doing what I'm asking them, and I just simply, to put it simply, I will do for them what they won't do for me, right? If I want them to put their hands behind their back and they won't, I will simply put that hand behind the back, but again, getting in a position just in case I get resistance. If I have somebody proned out or on the ground or sitting on the ground, me or a partner and I will simply prone them out, put the handcuffs behind their back and get them cuffed. And we don't need to do anything other than, if they remain truly a passive resistor, I don't need to do anything other than do for them what they won't do that I'm asking. And so a passive resistor that is a fairly simple as long as they remain passive. But again, we always need to be prepared for somebody to become resistive, but we're not putting them in any control or position that's causing pain whatsoever. And now we get up into the active resistor. And this is a little bit more complicated because there's so many ways somebody could resist you. They can tense up. They can pull their arm away. They can walk away from you. They can run away from you. So there's so many different ways that somebody can actively resist. And so when I'm trying to get control of somebody that's resisting, I have standing control holds that I can do. And keep in mind that we train in teams, which means we prefer the principle of mass. That would mean 2 officers to 1 arrestee. If we have 2 officers to 1 arrestee, again, the officers are less likely to get hurt. The arrestee is less likely to get hurt. And so we're more able to control them. But whether it's you're by yourself or there's 2 of you, they're actively resisting. So I might be they're resisting me and I'm trying to get them in some type of control hold and I'm able to get to that control. And I would prefer to control somebody standing. Unfortunately, many, if not most, altercations when somebody's resisting end up on the ground. But there's different levels of resistance, right? So my goal is to control them standing. And the reason for that is even if I'm an excellent technician, grappling technician, controlling somebody on the ground, once the fight goes to the ground, even if I'm good at what I'm doing, everything that's available to me on my belt, whether it be my taser, my pepper spray, or my handgun, is also available to them while we're grappling on the ground. So it all comes down to the reasonable officer, which I'm really going to get into a little bit later. So if I have somebody resisting, yeah, great, control them standing. If I can't control them standing, and I've got a couple of choices. And if I know that I can take this person down, but I think I know their background, I know they're a good ground fighter. I know that they're a lot bigger and stronger than me. They're intoxicated, things like that. I may decide I don't want to take that person down to the ground because I think they're more likely to get hurt and I'm more likely to get hurt. So another option is to simply disengage and get to another tool. So if I have somebody that I'm trying to control and I can't control them and I don't feel comfortable taking them down to the ground to control, I can disengage, I can get to a taser, I can get to my pepper spray, I can use these other tactics to try to control them. So if I decide to expose them to a taser and I get a good shot, they're immobilized for those 5 seconds. And then during that 5 seconds is the time to go in and get control while they're not moving, not after the 5 seconds is over. Or I may choose to pepper spray them and take advantage of a time when I can go in and get control of somebody after they've been sprayed. So for my active resistor, my goal is to still get control of them, but I have these different options that I can do for an active resistor. So the thing that we'll work up to now is what's called an aggressive assailant. And I think a lot of these are self-explanatory, but if I have somebody that is attacking me, okay, that's an aggressive assailant. But again, it can vary. How am I under attack? Am I getting shoved? That's not a huge attack, right? I have to be a reasonable officer. If I have somebody that comes up and they start knocking me down and punching me in the face, that's also an aggressive assailant, right? So I have different levels of attacks that can be happening. And so there's things that I can do, but they all have to be reasonable based on how I'm being attacked and a lot of other circumstances that we're going to get to in a little bit. So I have an aggressive assailant, and I'm under attack. So this is where I can still try to control them. My goal is to still try to control them, not just, duke it out with them, right? My job is still, so if I can work my way in and get control of them, if I can, get some distance and still use my spray or my taser when I'm under attack, that's great. Those are other options. And, I may choose those, but eventually I have to be able to get control of them. But that being said, generally speaking, if I'm under attack, I can attack back. So it might be to where it's a very high-end attack. I might be getting punched and elbowed and kicked and things like that. And it's like, well, my goal is to control them. But if I'm under attack, I can attack them back. So if somebody is striking me, I can strike them back, knowing that during that altercation, at some point, I need to not just have it be continued, sparring. I need to be able to go in and get control of them. So rule of thumb, I'm under attack, I can attack back. But again, reasonable officerness, which we're going to get to in a little bit. And then we have the deadly force assailant. And a deadly force assailant would be where the officer has the perception that they or someone else is in imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. And training is important for this, but it's based on a reasonable officer. So if it's my perception at that moment, based on the totality of the circumstances, that myself or someone else is in imminent threat of death or great bodily harm, I can use deadly force. And the most common form of deadly force is for an officer to use their handgun. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people think that deadly force, my goal is to kill them. It's not. My goal is to stop the threat. So if it ends up being, using my handgun and the threat is stopped, then that's where I stop using my handgun. If it's a situation where my handgun's not available and I can't transition to it and I have something else in my hand, maybe my baton's in my hand, I might strike them with my baton in a deadly force situation, depending on weapons involved and things like that. Basically, there isn't anything that I shouldn't be able to do to stop the threat, imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. So there really isn't anything you can't do, but once the threat is stopped, that's when you transition. That's when you get first aid and you do things like that. There, excuse me. There is a time when you can use your baton, just to back up a little bit, against an aggressive assailant. And I am not going to use a baton other than for leverage things, maybe for an active resistor. But a baton, if I'm under attack and it's a fairly high level of attack, I can strike them with my baton. Those strikes will be primarily sub-waist large muscle groups. And of course, I'd be given the command, stop fighting, get down on the ground, and you're striking them sub-waist large muscle groups. I'm under attack. That is a time where you can use those things like that. And I want to maybe just give another situation and some examples of an active resistor. I know I'm floating around a little bit, but this does flow a little bit. So if I have an active resistor, and my goal is to control them, an active resistor could also be somebody that is holding onto their steering wheel and not letting go. It could be somebody that's holding onto something and not letting go. It could be somebody on the ground with their arms underneath them. And so those are times where we can use things like pressure points. We can use those pressure sensitive areas. We can use distraction techniques on an active resistor, which are actually strikes, but you are striking these pressure sensitive areas that's not going to cause great bodily harm to them. They're distraction techniques. You might be a knee into the common peroneal on the side of the leg. It might be for somebody holding on to something and you need to get their arm free to get them out. It might be a strike on the radial nerve on the arm to get control of them. And it could even be a brachial plexus strike on the side of the neck, not the front, not the back, and usually with something a little bigger. So these are all techniques that are allowed in each of these different, different types of resistance and attacks that I can use, but they all have to be reasonable. And do you want to do any questions before I move on? Everybody with me so far? Okay.
I guess I have a question in that you're using very exact technical language, which I understand the use in instruction and in limiting, but they don't necessarily mean much to a lay person like me.
Did you have a certain question about a certain thing that I have said, or?
Well, when you talk of active resistor, I'm trying to imagine I'm the guy sitting down on the chair. Somebody's asking me to get out of the car. And I'm like, why should I get out of the car? You don't have a right to get me out of the car.
Okay.
So I'm feeling indignant. Am I an active resistor? Because I don't get out of the car just because you tell me to? I don't have anything. I haven't done anything. And so as a regular person, I'm like, I don't know what technical term you're in your head, but in my head, I'm dealing with justice. I haven't done anything, and you're asking me to get out of the car, for example.
Right, and you are not an active resistor at that point. If there was, let's say there is a warrant for your arrest.
Okay.
And you're sitting in your vehicle. If I could back up a little bit, part of our use of force training, a lot of it has to do with de-escalation training. So let's say that there is a warrant for your arrest and it's for failure to appear on a traffic ticket. You may or may not know about it. You may have forgotten to go to court. And it's my job to arrest you because you have this warrant. And as I approach the vehicle, I am going to use my de-escalation techniques. And this is what we teach over and over, and recruits get so many repetitions on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle. But what police officers need to do more and more every day is to explain why you need to get out. Take our time, talk to people, and explain things to people. So I'm going to say, ma'am, I'm going to ask you to get out of the car. But as soon as I ask that, you're thinking, why? What did I do, right? So I take my time and explain it. And this is how we teach it. So, all right, ma'am, I'm going to ask you to get out of the car. And the reason I need you to get out is I ran your name. There's a minor warrant that we have to get taken care of. It looks like it's failure to appear on a traffic ticket. It's very likely you forgot to go to court. It happens all the time. Happened to my son once, right? I mean, these things happen. So this is something that we need to get taken care of. And then if you don't want to get out of the car, I still have the right to arrest you, but I'm not just going to pull you out of the car. I'm going to say, ma'am, we've got some options here. I don't want to see anything worse happen to you. Right now, all we've got is a minor warrant. The bond is $2,500, but you only need to pay $250. That's your bond. And, we can get this taken care of. Unfortunately, and I don't want to do this, unfortunately, since I do have a, lawful reason to arrest you and get you out of the car, and you resist me, then you're going to have additional charges of resisting arrest. You might have to stay the night in jail. I don't want that for you. I'm sure you have some things you need to do tonight. It's a very minor warrant, and I don't want things to be worse for you. Ma'am, would you please step out of the car so we can get this taken care of? Does that make sense on how we would handle that situation?
It makes a lot more sense because right now, as we went from the bottom to the top, I think to myself, as a regular person, why would I be there? I realize that if I've done bodily harm to somebody and there is a warrant for my arrest, there is more alarm to scale up. But that conversation that you just said was not running through my head as I was looking at this. You're gaining control.
Right. And
I don't know why you're gaining control. There are many times in which, at least as a regular person, I am confused as to what's going on.
Oh yeah, and if you said I don't understand, I don't know what's going on, what is this about? I will take my time and I will explain it to you. It's not like, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, right? That's old school. And you know what? I can understand you being upset, and I would tell you that if I was in your situation, I would be upset too, because if I'm in there and I get stopped and I forgot to go to court, I'd be feeling the same way you're feeling. I understand how you're feeling, right? I mean, these are the tactics that we teach and get repetitions over and over and over. And if I could just throw in, I don't want to make this go on forever, but so I did a panel discussion a few years ago with Sharon Cooper, Sandra Bland's sister. Is everybody familiar with her? So I did a panel discussion with her, and I had just taught my recruits how to approach a vehicle stop, how to do this very same exact steps, say the same things to every person, do things the same way, and use these techniques. And I asked her ahead of time before the panel discussion, I said, are you comfortable with me saying that talking about how I use that Sandra Bland stop as every single thing not to do? Because part of it is for officers not to take things personal, right? I mean, you don't really know me, Mike, right? You're not really mad at me. You're mad at the situation. And if I can understand that you're upset with the situation, then I don't have to get angry back. And in that situation, my theory is the officer was unprofessional. He didn't do any de-escalation. He didn't do anything that we teach. And he became angry because she wouldn't put out her cigarette. That's my theory on that. And if he would have handled things right to begin with, she would be alive today. So.
Mike, a quick comment.
Sure.
When you started this, I appreciate Ricardo having asked that question because I don't want to belabor this too much, but I think this difference between an arrestee and a person, when you started, you actually said cooperative arrestee once, and I made a note of it when you were talking about the use of force paradigm here.
Right.
And so one of the things I'm interested in learning more about is at what point in time that person turns into an arrestee. Now, obviously, if you've got him up on your screen and you've got, there's warrants all over the state for this guy, that's a different paradigm you guys go into, right? But that seam of when, the citizen becomes the arrestee, I think is at the root of some of the issues we have. So as we go forward, I'd appreciate if you kind of keep that in mind for us and kind of help us understand that point, both in the context of what the citizen action might have been to all of a sudden say, okay, this is now going to be an arrest, and in the context of what the responsibilities of the officer are when that goes from cooperative person to cooperative arrestee. Because right at that theme is where this explosion, I think, can happen.
Right.
Thanks.
I think I understand what you're saying. What we're using this scale for is this cooperative person is an arrestee already. So I'm going to arrest somebody based on a warrant. I'm going to arrest somebody based on something I saw, or I'm going to maybe make an arrest on witness identification. And I am going to know that that person's under arrest. I'm not going to just go up and start talking to somebody and place somebody under arrest without having probable cause for an arrest. But sometimes that can happen. And I can give you an example of that if you'd like. Does that be okay?
Well, I mean, I understand what you're talking, I think
Okay.
I understand what you're talking about.
Well, let me just give you another scenario. So let's say that there was a crime that just happened right down here on Green Street, and somebody had gone in and shoplifted a bunch of stuff. Okay. And so I get the call and they give me the description of the guy. Okay. And it's a man with a white beard wearing a green shirt. Okay. Yeah, I can see what you're wearing. And I'm guessing 20 years old, 25, but no.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, okay. But yeah, so I get that description and you're near that area and it just happened. And green shirt, beard, describing you, maybe what your clothing and what you wear. You may not have had anything to do with that. So I'm going to stop you and I'm going to say, again, sir, I need to talk to you for a few minutes, and here's why. Because you want to know why I'm stopping you, right? So I'm going to say, you know what, there was a minor theft down the street. I'm going to minimize it. You just happen to match the description of the person that committed that crime. Right now, if I can get some identification from you, find out who you are, I can get you on your way quickly. And then you say, no, I didn't do it. I want to walk away. All right, sir, here's the situation, and I don't want this to happen. You happen to match the description, which means, and you're close by, which means even if you didn't commit that crime, since you match that description, I can keep you here for a reasonable amount of time. You're not under arrest, and I don't want it to end up in arrest. But if you walk away, even if you didn't commit that crime, that is unlawful. I don't want to do that. If I can just chat with you for a few minutes, get some ID from you and get you on your way. But then let's say that somebody comes by and does what we call a show up and identifies you and saying, yeah, that's the guy. And I think his name's Scott because I've seen him here before or whatever. And then you get positively identified by 1, 2, or 3 or more people as the person that did it, then I would place you under arrest. But if you didn't do it and you started to walk away, I need to take the time to explain why you would be arrested even if you didn't commit that crime. That's where a cooperative person could become an arrestee.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm fine with the questions in between so I don't get too far away ahead and have to think back. So please feel free to interrupt me anytime. So any more questions on the use of force scale? So let me clarify some things. Well, let's move on to our court cases, and I think that will definitely clarify some things. All right, so even today, these 2 court cases, Tennessee v. Garner and Graham v. Connor, are probably the 2 most important court cases in use of force. And there's been several since then, but these are referenced every time, if something goes to, a lower court, Illinois Supreme Court, or, the United States Supreme Court, they still look back on these particular court cases. And 1985, Tennessee v. Garner, that was where a young man was burglarizing a place, ran away, tried to run, get over the fence. And I can't remember, I think he's like 14 years old, and he's a fleeing felon, and the officer shot and killed him. And so before 1985, this happened earlier, but before they made the decision, it was lawful to shoot certain fleeing felons, like a burglar, right? And so, and then more came in Graham v. Connor. So actually, when I started in police work in 1984, there was a policy. Most departments had a policy. You could shoot a fleeing felon. Most didn't. It's like No, I'm not going to do that. We'll chase the kid or find him or something later. But that was still around the United States. That was very popular. And then Graham v. Connor came in with a lot of important decisions and recommendations on what would be proper use of force and not an excessive use of force. So things that the courts look at, one of them would be the seriousness of the offense. And also along with that, the force used, is it really necessary? Does it really outweigh the seriousness of the offense? So let me give you a little scenario on that, because I think these scenarios maybe help put things in perspective rather than just jabbering, okay? So that's a word, isn't it? So let's say that I have an adult go into a gas station, push the attendant out of the way, trying to get money, but grabbing all kinds of stuff and grabbing all these things and just, trying to get everything they can. And they take off and they're running from the scene down in a parking lot. They did get some money out of the cash register. This is a pretty serious offense. The person was forceful to the attendant, and they're running away from me. And I think that I cannot let this violent person get away. And I choose to use my taser, knowing that it's a hard ground and he might get cut up a little bit, might even need stitches, but that would be reasonable. Okay, same situation. I get a young man goes in and steals a box of Snickers. Okay, you guys like Snickers? Frozen Snickers, that's where it's at. So let's say I get a kid that goes in and steals a bag or a box of Snicker bars, and he's running away from me in the parking lot. And I know that if I expose him to taser, that he's going to hit, because he's fast, right? So, he's going to hit that ground and he could get hurt pretty seriously compared to the offense, right? I'm not going to use my taser in that situation. So we look at the seriousness of the offense as, part of why we do or don't do what we do. But we also look at things like physical threat, the subject, the offender, size and ability. If you have a very small officer and they're trying to fight somebody really big, they might have to use more force. But there's also people that we've interacted with on the streets that we've had to arrest before that aren't big. Maybe they're an MMA fighter now. Maybe, we've had to have 2 or 3 officers fight them. I might need to use more force against somebody that's not very big, but I have knowledge of their ability. Also the availability or inferences of weapons. If I believe weapons are involved and somebody might have a gun, those things play into it. Are there other people present? How many cops do I have and how many people am I interacting with where things could get ugly? Again, where learning how to talk to people definitely helps. But these things come into play, and they have to be, to use force, they have to be either actively resisting or attempting to evade by flight. So that's when I can use force, but it's the totality of the circumstances that determine what you can or can't do. So if I have, like another case where I have, where it says you can use takedowns if somebody's resisting you. So I have somebody resisting me, and it's, somebody with, they're big, they're strong, and I might have to take them down to the ground, and because they're resisting. Okay, I have an elderly person that's resisting me. Well, it says in that little part there, if somebody's actively resisting me, then I can do a takedown, but that's not reasonable. So that's why we have these, this is the arrestee's actions, and these are the options police officers have. But just because they're actively resisting, you can't pick from every option in there. It has to be what a reasonable officer would do. Make sense to everybody? A nod? Or,
Yes.
Okay.
It does to me, Michael, but I have to, I guess it's just upbringing. As a brown person, and I put it on the table because my training tells me I better not move, I better not make any sudden, not anything. My likelihood of getting taken down for no reason is higher than yours, from experience. But the other thing that gets me is, as I listen to you, and you're watching the same videos I'm watching, you must be really mad because you're teaching one thing and they're acting in another way. They are taking down the old lady. They are more than immobilizing people. And that just like gets me because your training is so reasonable, but that's not what I see on many of these videos.
Yeah, and I completely understand what you're saying, and Mikhail understands a lot of the other stuff that I teach here at PTI, where I do teach about implicit bias and unconscious racism, and people's assumptions, biases, and stereotypes of different races, gender, age, sexual orientation, how somebody dresses. I mean, we all have these, and we need to be aware of them, and we need to one way that I can do is train it out of them. But if I can also get them to understand that these implicit biases, or as critical race theorists would say, unconscious racism, that to recognize that. But the more, I believe, the more they train, the more they're likely to base their decisions on behavior. But yes, it actually it angers me. And for people that know me, I'm like a person that doesn't get angry, drives my wife crazy sometimes, how come you're not mad? But I'm not that type of person. But it does anger me. It was heart-wrenching, George Floyd and Walter Scott, and so there's been so many that it's like, you're giving all of us a bad name. But I think it's time that the police stop saying a few bad apples. And where I truly believe the vast majority of officers are doing the job the right way, I feel like that particular little narrative or that quote almost makes it sound like a few bad apples. So I'm just ignoring what else is out there and what I can get better at and what police can do better. Does that make sense? So does that answer your question, or at least I can?
I feel better at getting it out because it's the feelings I get as I listen to your reasoned response, and I wish it were standardized enough that the other junk didn't happen. But I trust you that that's the training, and that therefore I have something to hang on to as to what is justified, because we just got through running a Know Your Rights training, and it was very hard to listen and to teach people you do have the right to remain silent. You do have the right not to show your ID if you're a passenger. But when the language is so abusive, you can't help but to start reacting in a not so nice way. So
no, and I can understand that it's, we live in a sad world where mothers and fathers of racial minority children, specifically brown and black, have to have that talk with them. That's sad. And, it's completely up to the police to try to gain trust of citizens more so. And part of that is, and I know I'm getting off track a little bit, but I think this is important and I just want to mention it, is that, a lot of times police officers in most places are understaffed and they're handling calls. They're going from call to call to call, writing reports, and they don't have the time they should have to get out and interact with the community. What worked for me as a police officer is I was in a small enough community, and I mean, it's not a, it's a low income and it's very diverse. Rantoul is where I worked, but I had the ability and the time to get out and get to know virtually everybody in my community. And they got to know me not as Officer Schlosser or Sergeant Schlosser. They got to know me as Mike. And then, we'd have conversations, and then you just get to know people. And the best way to get over any biases, I believe, is to develop true relationships and friendships with people that are different than you. And that is something else I promote to all of our recruits. And the more we can do that, I think the more it reduces our biases. So, sorry, I got on my soapbox. Okay. All right. Anything else before I go on the next slide?
Just real quick, I've been following everything up until you started to talk about your objection to the narrative about bad apples. And
yeah.
I didn't quite follow what it is about that narrative that is concerning to you. So I just want to ask you to expand on that a little bit.
All right. So I truly believe that the vast majority of officers in this country are doing things right. And I do know that there's different agencies with different cultures and different cities and different shifts, and there's different heavy-handed cultures, or the kind of the us against them and the blue code of silence, like Laquan McDonald, and all of that. But even if officers truly believe that, okay, it is a few bad apples or the vast majority are good, I just feel like that particular phrase, people that I talk to that are different than me, they say that phrase makes it sound like you're saying there isn't a problem, it's just a few bad apples. It's a systemic problem, and it's not just getting rid of the few bad apples.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if we're gathering apples, we might be okay with just discarding the bad ones. But in this case, the feedback you're getting and that you're basically agreeing with is that's not good enough. You know, there are other problems that are deeper than the few that are obviously quote unquote bad.
Yes.
And we need to identify, you know, the aspects of policing culture, like the thin blue line, right? And figure out ways to address those issues.
Yes. See, that's why you're the smart professor. That's why I always listen to you so much. So.
Oh, no. I'm just repeating what you're saying.
No, well, you articulate it. You know, I mean, you speak well, I talk good. Hey, right? All right. Anything else before I go on the next slide? I'm getting kind of close to the end here for questions. All right. So other things that they look at, you could have virtually the same situation, the same type of resistance, and 10 different officers handled that resistance in a different way. And all of them could be reasonable, because it's not everybody learns, if this happens, this is my exact technique. This happens, this is my exact technique, because things are very volatile and, you know, and dynamic and resistance situations. So people might resort to different things based on similar circumstances. But this is, the courts say it's based on an objectively reasonable officer, not an objectively reasonable person. The purpose of them putting that in there was because they want people to understand that, okay, so is this something an objectively reasonable officer would do, because an officer has the training, has the experience, has, you know, the tactics and things like that. So rather than somebody that's not knowledgeable, is that something a reasonable officer would do versus a reasonable person? And again, I've talked about this a lot too, the totality of the circumstances. And that's why when, you know, as an expert witness, somebody wants to show me a video and say, is that excessive or not? Well, I don't know. I need to know so much. When I'm an expert witness, I need to see every video. I need to read every report. I need to read the depositions. I need to, you know what the officer was thinking. I need to know why I need to know so much before I can make a conclusion. So it's hard with just a video. Some videos are obvious, right? We you know, but some of them are just like, I just need to know more. Maybe there's something more to this. So I don't want to just jump and watch a video and say, that was bad. And I don't want to be like, maybe some cops will maybe look at something, and there's a reason for this, but some cops may look at something and say, well, I can see why they could do that because, and then I could get people that don't understand it and they say, well, that was obviously bad. And I think this is where sometimes our confirmation bias comes in, you know, where it's like, you know, I am a police officer and, you know, I'm biased towards the police and I hang out with police and do the media with police, social media. And so I'm afraid to listen to the other side. And, you know, groups have a hard time, you know, getting away from their particular worldwide views and beliefs, and maybe trying to understand each other better and figure out what the truth is. And that's hard to do, and especially the more emotional a situation is, the more your confirmation bias comes into play. And again, I know Professor knows more about that than me, but that's my spiel on it. So the courts also look at like hindsight 2020. They say, no, we can't do hindsight 2020. And again, I think scenarios are good. So I'll give you a scenario that I had once happen to me. So we had someone come over to the Rantoul police station, and there was a bar bowling alley next door, and he came to the police station and he walked up to the dispatcher, and I'm going to use my words, not his, because I don't come from a cussing family, but he said, I have a gun, basically. It's right here. He kind of reached in his jacket a little bit. And if you've got a cop that's got the guts, he used other language, to come over and get me, I'll be waiting for him. And I did not do good tactics at that time. I was in my 20s, and I thought I had to prove myself. So I handled the call by myself rather than waiting for backup. So I learned my lesson early on when I got in trouble. But so I thought, oh, I'll be sneaky. I'll walk into the side door, by the alley instead of going in the front door. So I walk in the side door, and just within like 2 feet, this guy's sitting at a tall table with bar stools. You guys ever been in a bar? You know what I'm talking about? All right. And he stands up, and it was his description. I knew exactly what he was wearing. I knew what hat he was wearing. I knew he had a mullet. That's how long ago it was. So he stood up and turned around to me, and we were very close, and he reached his hand in here. Now that, if I would have shot him to stop the threat, that was lawful, because when he reaches in for his weapon, action is faster than reaction. So I can't wait until it gets to here before I shoot, because I'm already shot. So he reached in, I grabbed a hold of his wrist, I grabbed a hold of his mullet, took him down to the ground, controlled him. Somebody jumped on my back. It was my sergeant getting there yelling at me for, what are you doing here? We got him cuffed, we got him up, we walked him out to the alley again. We did a pat down on him, and he did not have a weapon. It was suicide by cop. But my perception at that moment, even though he was unarmed, is that he was reaching for a weapon to shoot me. So that would have been a lawful shoot. And I think, okay, so I've been a martial artist since the 70s. Was it the fact that I truly was quick enough to do this and do that? Or because it was suicide by cop? And if it wasn't, would he probably have been able to shoot me? I don't know, but it's a mistake I learned early on. So when we look at hindsight 2020, we said, well, you shot him and you didn't have a gun. But my perception at that moment told me that, I was in jeopardy of death or great bodily harm. And the courts also realized that officers have to make split-second decisions. And that does come into play too. And then when we're talking about, we've already talked about this, but Tennessee v. Garner, basically says that if my perception is that I'm an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm, my goal, I can use deadly force, which is to stop the threat. If myself or someone else, in my mind, in my perception, based on the totality of the circumstances, is in jeopardy, imminent jeopardy of death or great bodily harm, I can use deadly force. And my goal is to stop the threat. And these are things that we've kind of already talked about, so. And I said this, but in most cases, it's difficult to judge proper use of force based on a video, and we must know the totality of the circumstances. And then officers are required to immediately provide medical assistance. We really push that, and we really push the intervening of another officer using excessive force. In fact, about 5 years ago, I brought in scenarios where the recruit goes in and an officer is using excessive force to see how they react. So we do some of these ethics scenarios within our 84 hours of scenarios, even though 40 hours is required by the state. So that's something else we do. And that, I think we're ready for questions. Stop share, is that how I do this?
Yep.
I hear you, what you just said. Local Urbana police get 80 hours, or recruits get 80 hours versus 40 that are required?
Our recruits, so what's required, things that I think are important I bring in. Let me give an example of what our local officers get, and others, because we get people from Naperville and Rockford suburbs everywhere. So the training board requires 40 hours of scenario-based training. We do 84. And it's so much of it involves practicing the de-escalation training. So much of it involves use of force. 32 hours of control and arrest tactics, knowing how to control somebody, is required by the state. We do 54 hours because I think that the more confident that an officer is in their physical skills to control somebody, the more likely they're going to communicate and they won't respond out of fear. They won't respond out of bias. They will have more confidence in their abilities from their de-escalation training, from their control tactics training, knowing if it goes there, they're prepared. And just anecdotally over the years, being around so many cops around the state, I've noticed that when I see an officer getting yelled at and screamed at and cussed at, and they're just standing there saying, you know, sir, I can see you're upset. You know, I probably would be too. And just talking to them real calm, it's that officer is confident. If I see somebody immediately jump into a fight, demeanor doesn't belong there. Bad apple, I know, I don't like that word. You know, scared, not trained, culture of the department. There's other reasons. So the other courses we bring in that are not required by the state are the 9 hours of policing in a multiracial society, wrongful conviction and awareness and avoidance. And we work with the Illinois Innocence Project on that. And at the end of that discussion on best practices to try to keep the wrong people from going to prison, we have an exoneree come in and talk, and that really hits home with them. I was in prison for 25 years for a crime I didn't commit. This is what happened. This is what happened to my life, and this, you know, and that. And I bring in LGBTQ ally training and several other courses but I have to make them optional and make them mandatory because that's not within the state curriculum. But the majority of officers, and of course all the local officers, do sign up for those specialized classes that we do offer.
So I guess I'm hearing, I don't know what the process is yet. When somebody is, a recruit is what? Somebody's already been hired or somebody who's gone to academy? I'm not understanding that. And then my second question is, once you're hired, you have your 80 hours and then what follows? What's in service? We'd call that under teaching.
Okay. So an officer is hired by an agency, whether it's Champaign or Urbana, Naperville, Leroy, Thomas, whatever, an officer is hired. And so now that they're hired, so the hiring process is very lengthy. A lot of officers think that once they're hired, that's it. But the hiring process expands through the 14 weeks of academy training. And within that 14 weeks, we add in all those extra scenarios. We crunch a lot in a short amount of time because we can't go beyond the 14 weeks. So you're hired and you may or may not make it through my academy. I've already, I kick out a lot and probably more than any previous director. And a lot of people think it was serious things like the one thing that happened recently. But many times it's something they did that really wasn't that big of a deal and they would have been disciplined, but they lied about it and they're automatically gone. Integrity is huge at our police training institute. So I root out several that way. And it's easier to do that by not doing a paramilitary academy. It's easier to do that by letting them be themselves a little bit, giving them a little bit of freedom. And I don't believe in the paramilitary academy because I don't think I should yell at them for 14 weeks and say, now go out there and be nice to people, you know? So I just want them to get to know me and I want them to talk to people on the street just like I talk to them. I'm the director, but they know me. They know my dad jokes. They know I'm a Cubs fan and I'm missing the game tonight and, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, so that's kind of the community policing aspect that we put into it too. And then once they go back to the departments, they have their field training program, but they're still not completely hired yet because then they have a longer period of time that they're on probation. So it's like there's a lot to it and we're way better than we were years ago. I would like to see more weeks of academy training, you know, but, and I would like to see some things that we do mandated by the state for some of our extra courses and extra scenarios and de-escalation training, but we do the best we can. But that's the process, if that explains it. Am I boring you guys? You're just kind of.
I'm waiting for somebody else to jump in because
Okay.
I can go on about this stuff a bit.
Oh, I can too.
Do you do any training or is it available in the state for incident review? I did a NACOL. I'm sure you're familiar with the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, right? I did a training that was really interesting for me about critical incident or sentinel incident review is what they called it. And there was a guy named Holloway from the Penn Law School that really had an interesting set of graphics about the bad apple scenario that you guys were talking about before. And it was a simple presentation where he talked about prioritizing mistakes versus misconduct. And his whole idea is about errors are caused by faulty systems and processes. And he had this really neat graphic where, he had big, like a Venn diagram, the mistakes and the misconduct, the tighter you can shrink the mistakes thing. So where a cop just makes an error in training, then the accompanying Venn diagram of misconduct blows up. As a way to sort of think about the bad apple scenario. But I found it real instructive that in several other places, and he mentioned air transportation and medical review, we have very systematic ways where professionals come together to try to weed out these mistakes versus misconduct situations. And that their argument, of course, they're selling a product in a way, is that the way we do these critical incident reviews and the lack of them in the policing community is one of the reasons we can't get our hands around this bad apple sort of scenario. I don't know whether you ever heard from him, heard about them, but I thought it was a real interesting presentation. And I had a couple of questions, and maybe you can help me with this, and maybe not. Do we know what happens to the body chemistry of a person who undergoes attack or threat? As I'm getting my mind around recent local events and national events, I recall, the times when I've got mad or been angry or had to actually, be in a defensive posture. And I'm trying to put myself in the place of an officer here, and just as much as I can. Do we know how long it takes to ramp up that adrenaline rush, and really what it does to an officer on duty, let's just say, without trying to excuse behavior, because I'm going someplace else with this? How our bodies respond to the kind of stress that we put them under, what that lapse time is to basically come back down from an event like that. I mean, is this something that you study at all, Mike?
I discuss things a little differently. That sounds more like this is where we would want our administrators to, in our department policies and, our administrators to understand that, so that they know, if somebody's been involved in some type of critical incident, or they've gotten to that point where they're angry and things went bad, and they were involved in a critical incident, more departments are like, okay, we're taking this person off the street. We're making sure they're getting counseling and things like that. But as far as the science behind it, we don't, that's not as much of an academy thing as I would think that the type of training you're talking about would be good for the agencies, the leadership. I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, I may have kind of conflated those two issues. So one of my concerns about policing in Urbana has been that these guys are by themselves. Now, when they get to an event, of course, there's lots of stuff going on. They could have lots of backup. But when queried a couple of years ago about what to do with the 2 extra cops, what I said is put 2 cops in 1 car on the beats that are the toughest. Because it seems to me as if that isolated environment of anxiety is difficult to manage physiologically. And so I guess the direct question I have for you is, do you train to be able to help cops know when to hand off? I mean, if I get in a situation.
Okay. So
I'm ticked off, man. I mean, I
Intervening?
am full blown.
Yeah. Here's
Where
what.
do I defer?
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with area cops, and then when we're going to be, and we're talking about that now with our recruits. So it's kind of like the ethics scenario, right? The person's using excessive force, right? Or you see a potential that an officer's getting angry, and cops are really good at this, because I might go up to a call and I see the officer, the person yelling at the officer, and the officer's starting to yell back, and you can tell they're tensing up. And I might say, hey, Bob or John or whatever, made up names. Okay. Hey, let me, I got this. And then a new officer comes in and they can usually handle, because they're not directly involved in the initial thing. And so, and I think that happens more than you think. I thought about when I saw the George Floyd incident, I said, man, our officers in this area that I know are going to have the guts and the ability to go up and say, dude, get off his freaking neck, or push that person off. And these are officers that I've trained and I've known for years. And I still go into the different agencies and provide extra training for them. And, you know, so I think that we're training that more now in the academy, right? Because of incidents that have happened. And we just had a conversation about that recently about, you know, I'm doing you a favor if you're getting angry, but I might also be doing that person a favor that you're getting ready to go hands-on with.
So I have one more.
Not even as many as you want.
Then, I want to leave room for other people. Happened to literally bicycle into an incident at a park recently, where it was obvious that the conflict between family members was a social work problem. It didn't have to be a police problem. It was probably going to start that way regardless, because there were threats involved. And I'm wondering what kind of support an officer in the field has for an immediate response component other than a shift sergeant. You know, as we look toward maybe substantial change in the way cops do their jobs, and trying to be an advocate and wanting to support them, this just seemed like a case that was just really, really difficult to see unfold, because, you know, what the younger woman that was involved in this needed was somebody to be able to directly emotionally care and then probably physically care for her for a while. Is there anything in the training that you do that relates to that? Or do you have any opinions about, you know, whether a department needs to have somebody with an MSW on staff and ready to go whenever, you know, they're needed?
I think it would be fantastic to, if you look at the mental health issues and the amount of funds that are provided for mental health issues over the years, it needs to be increased so much. And unfortunately, so many people with some of the most serious mental health issues, because there's no other place for them, some of them are in the Champaign County Jail. And the sheriff doesn't want that. But, you know, it's like they've got appointments to get them in one of the places in the state to help them more, you know, but it's tragic. But I don't have a problem with, you know, having social workers, counselors, things like that in police work. We just, I do have a little bit of worry in the back of my head. It's like, you know, I know that most officers are pretty good at de-escalating situations, and even the ones where you know, officer, you know, here's what happens so much. 2 officers go into a violent domestic or a disturbance, and the person ends up complying and putting their hands behind their back. That happens way more than not. I was during our little break here when we didn't have a class, I was in here at PTI. I had somebody knocking on my door, the front door, and I went and I chatted with them, and they obviously had some mental health issues. So I called the U of I Police Department, and 2 U of I cops came by, and this kid was hysterical about all this crimes happening across the street at the frat, and there wasn't even anybody there. So he had some serious issues, and he was very riled up. and these two officers, and I'll give them credit, Lammers and Hoskins. So I watched them, and within 10 minutes, this kid was calm. They knew that he admitted that he was bipolar, that he was taking medications. They knew who his parents were, where he lived, the phone number. They were able to do so much. I think that happens more than you think. And then when I think about maybe initially having somebody like a social worker go to even a neighborhood dispute, sometimes those things are already potentially super violent, and cops do have a way of de-escalating, and the ones that don't need the training, or we don't want them, right? But I can see situations where it would be valuable, and even more valuable, to have more mental health care workers working with police agencies. Absolutely. So yes, I agree, but I also, it's like I'm hearing that Berkeley wants, non-police, non-weapon carrying people to make traffic stops to do the traffic. That scares me. And because you don't know who you're stopping, you don't know if there's a warrant for the arrest. Rantoul, late 1990s, had an officer stop a car with a taillight out at the Kerr-McGee gas station. And he walked up, and then that officer got shot in the face. It's kind of one of those sort of dangerous things, and I worry about that. So I worry for the unarmed people, even if their job is just to do traffic. So I started thinking of these scenarios. It's like, yeah, I would love to we need more of that. But a lot of times, a lot of agencies are handling the domestic that night, but then the counselor's following up with the victim, right after the call, and the next day, and staying in touch with them. And, those are the kinds of things that are being done around different agencies.
So a question and a comment. One, I come from a country where police work is different than traffic work. And all the time, there's traffic police that you got to watch for. You make a mistake, they'll pull you over, you get a ticket, and you go on your way. Criminal or not, you just broke a traffic law, and you pay for it, or at least they give you the ticket for it, or shake you down. That's another story. But I consider our system here kind of mixed up, in that police have to do a lot of things, including traffic, which seems to me like that's where they're spending most of their time. What about the other crimes? So anyway, but I want to come back to the other question that I asked you, because I'm not sure of volume. Your training institute, you say you bring in a lot of people from other parts of the state, but the question of in-service. So they do a bunch of hours with you, and then how do Urbana police, how much is required? How often do you see them, or what kind of training follow-up is there? Because we all have a sense of, we need some reminders, but especially the longer we're there, I wouldn't say just jaded, the less that we're receptive to going back through the system, because we've been around.
Yeah, I think that there's like 15 or 16 mobile team units in the state. They are run by the training board, which oversees all police. And there are numerous mandates. I don't have them in front of me, but you could probably go to the Illinois Police Act, and there's been so many new bills over the years where once a year every officer has to have this training. Every 2 years they have to have this training. Every 3 years they have to have this training. Whether it's use of force, law update, cultural competency, all these different things. And so because of these new bills that came in and made things mandated by the state, I think that's great. Me being a trainer thinks there should be more than what's required. But around here, because I know all the departments, I have gone into all of the departments from time to time for extra training. I'm in the process of training the U of IPD, University of Illinois Chicago, and University of Illinois Springfield, use of force de-escalation. I'll probably get into some of my other training with them. I'm going to be going to Rantoul for some training. I've been to Urbana several times. I've been to Champaign several times. So I can provide extra little bits and pieces for them. Sometimes it's hard to schedule because I'm the primary instructor for all of those things. So there is the mandated training, and it's continuing ed that's mandated through the state. And these are just places throughout the state that train like maybe a couple counties here and there. So there is ongoing training. Plus there's also in-service training. You know, there's officers that get together, like Urbana's getting ready to do their in-service training again, I think coming up real soon. So there's in-service training, there's the MTUs, there's PTI available to them. And so they're kind of in a good place where, you know, they reach out to us a lot. But I still think the more training, the better. I think that, you know, I wish we could train more, but a lot of times, you know, underfunded, understaffed, busy handling calls, writing reports. And that leads me to how are they going to get out of their car and get to know citizens as people and let the people get to know them as a person. You know, you look at somebody and they're in a uniform, you know, and then you're like, oh yeah, I know this guy. This is you know, this is Officer Matt Bain. Yeah, he's a cool guy, you know, or whatever, you know.
I have one last question. I don't want to take up everybody's time.
You moved over there. Go ahead. I lost you for a second.
It went away. So that was the comment. Good. Question, as far as who decides, coming back to use of force, who decides that balance stays straight after the fact? You're not allowed 20/20. It makes sense. No one should be judged by present information for their past actions. But a reasonable officer in that situation ought to be doing their best to keep that balance. Unfortunately, whether it's as Scott was working on the hormones, the chemical reaction that people have, their lack of training or their training that didn't take, create situations in which mistakes are made, sometimes mortal mistakes are made. So locally, how do you train for that? Who, you know, you mentioned that you're a witness, an expert witness. How does that happen locally when it comes to use of force and judgment of appropriate use of force?
I think different departments have different procedures around here and around, you know, the United States. I mean, internally is usually the first with their trained experts on use of force, and then it can go to an outside group. Some things could be, you know, investigated. They may want some opinions from me, consulting. And a lot of the things that they're able to do because PTI is here is because, you know, like Champaign County a few years ago had somebody that they felt like they really weren't very good at de-escalating and talking to people. So I said, well, I'm teaching that for 2 days on Thursday and Friday. Have them come back to my training and sit back in on my training. You know, have them come out on the mats for the control tactics with me, and I'll teach them, you know, on that. So we've got, you know, we're just kind of unique that, you know, we have a training academy right here, and I think that's helpful. But I still think that there's always room for improvement in every aspect of policing and training. And I'm all for police reform, and there's a lot of things we can do there, but we won't get into all the different ideas of police reform. I'll try to stick with kind of our plan tonight.
Thank you.
All right, let me jump in here with a question, Mike. Probably kind of a hard one.
I'm not going to answer it then.
Yeah, you may not be able to, but here's what I'm thinking. I experienced your presentation as interesting, as informative, and as something that was designed, I think, for the lay public to understand police use of force. And so thank you for that. I think the CPRB needs something a little bit more, which is that, okay, knowing these, you know, the scale that needs to be in balance, knowing the different things that that influence how much force a police officer is going to use at any given moment, right? When we're looking at an appeal, and in this case, I'm imagining an appeal involving use of force. Can you say something about what the CPRB should be looking for to determine whether the use of force was appropriate for the situation. Look, I guess maybe the question is, what if you were asked to review a case in which there was a complaint about the use of force? What are the things you would be looking for as you're looking at video, as you're reading the reports? Help us, figure out how to do our job.
Yeah, I wish I could give you guys like a semester-long class. I think the experience of, obviously I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I think sometimes it's difficult to determine things, but if you can have things explained to you by whoever is investigating it, and they're able to talk about the things that I'm talking about and show that, is this something that, based on at least my general knowledge and the information I'm getting, is this something that was reasonable? But it's difficult for some police officers to even look at cases to see it. I mean, they're all very knowledgeable on use of force, but a use of force expert would be nice to have to explain particular cases to you. And then so I mean, there's been cases around here where I've, like, should I offer my services on some of these things? Or if I give my opinion, even though I know I'm going to be fair, is it going to appear biased to the public because I know everybody? So most of my cases are not around here. My training is around here. Something else you might want to do is, I know you guys are busy people and have lives, but you're absolutely welcome to come and sit in on any training, whether it's our scenario-based training, whether it's our classroom training on, we have a lot of classes on use of force. We have attorneys teaching use of force. I teach use of force while I'm on the mats all the time. I mean, we welcome people to come and observe our training. We're proud of it. And there's no like secret police stuff that I can't tell you. Right. So I don't know that I can help you out any more than that answer.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike, do you guys still do the Citizens Police Academy thing?
We do, but we did not do it in April because we shut down March 16th. I think that's a nice, wonderful thing. Has anybody ever attended that?
Yeah, I did it when Pat Connolly was here.
Okay, so that's why you look familiar? Was I there too?
Yeah, you were there.
So you got to hear all my dad jokes, right?
I probably filtered those out. Megan, did you raise your hand to have attended that also?
I ended up attending about half of the sessions simply because the time you give it is right at the end of the school year.
Yeah.
And I just was too busy a lot of the nights. But yeah, I attended about half of it. It was extremely informative. I liked it. I look forward to doing more of it.
And if we have attendees that came to some and missed some, they can come to the next year and hit the ones they missed or go through the whole thing again. So yeah, we welcome, and it's a lot of fun, right?
I really enjoyed it, and it was really informative, and there were
all right. So
it's interesting.
So Megan, did you like my jokes or not? Be honest.
We have a phrase in my family. We call it "just look away," and maybe it'll stop. Yeah, I chuckled a little bit. I'll give you.
Okay. That. No, I appreciate a chuckle. I'll take that as a positive.
All right.
All right, board members, before we open up to the public, any last comments or questions for Mike? Okay, so I'm going to open it up, and Mike, you're okay with taking some questions from? Okay, good, thank you. I appreciate you agreeing to do that. I think it's an important part of, for me, it's part of the outreach that I hope the CPRB can do around policing. So I see we already have a hand up. Tracy, just give me 1 minute. I'm going to set just a few parameters on the Q&A. And the parameters are just feel free to ask Mike about policy. Feel free to ask him about hypotheticals. It looks like, and I'll just check in with you, Mike, you're open to talking about some of the high-profile cases in the news that are not local. Is that true?
Again, some of the, even the high profile cases, I have not had a chance to know everything that everybody else knows. I didn't read the depositions. I didn't read the reports. I didn't interview the officers, all those types of things. So it's difficult for me to do that honestly and to the best of my ability. So if we could leave out, any case, particular incidents, it's just hard for me, and I'm not trying to get out of it, right? I mean, I just want everybody to understand that as a use of force expert, I spend, days going through everything before I make a conclusion.
Yeah.
So hypotheticals are okay. Just know that sometimes during a hypothetical, my answer sometimes could be maybe because I still don't know to every single thing. So general use of force cases, or questions and hypotheticals that I'll try to help talk people through so I want to get something to somebody to better understand.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so I think that's probably pretty clear, and I saw Tracy with a hand up, so we will start with Tracy. Oh, one more thing, Tracy, sorry, before you get going. This part of public comment, please limit to matters concerning things that have to do with our guest speaker today. If you want to address the board about other things, we'll have some room at the very end. I just don't want to take up Mike's time on things that he doesn't have to be here for.
Okay.
Tracy, you're up.
Hi, Mike. This is Tracy. I'm resident of Urbana. I have actually 3 questions. Would it be best to go one by one, or?
I'm a one by one, very simple mind. Otherwise, I'd have to write it.
Okay, great. So actually, I'm following up on the question Ricardo asked about a person not getting out of the car. Let's say this hypothetical scenario. Imagine this hypothetical scenario where there's a crime reported in the area, no weapons involved, and there's a very generic description of the suspect, which is given something like just male, black t-shirt, blue jeans. At this point, there's no positive witness ID. So let's say someone who's just matching that very generic description is stopped when driving and is ordered to get out of the car, like we discussed. During this time, the person in the car has his hands very visibly on the steering wheel, and he naturally asks why he's being stopped. So then what happens if the police do not explain why the person is not being stopped and just keeps insisting that the person gets out of the car? What happens if the person just wants to know why he's been stopped, but the police officers, let's say they start to get violent, they point their weapons, they shatter the car window, they drag the person out of the car. Do you have any comment on how a scenario like this would be handled? Like should the person in this case be charged with resisting arrest?
So one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is, and the law says that you cannot resist an unlawful arrest because it may not have been you, but you can resist excessive use of force. But with those 2 things in mind, resisting could obviously make things worse. I would hope that that wouldn't happen. I would say, I am willing to get out of the car. I just would like to know why you want me to get out of the car. They may not even have a lawful reason for you to get out of the car. And you might want to say, I will get out of the car, but I would like your supervisor to come over here. And, I promise that I'm not going to resist you. I'm not comfortable getting out of my car. And I'd like you to explain it to me. And if you're not going to explain it to me, could you please have your sergeant come over, you know, or your supervisor come over and talk to me. But it's hard to imagine in this area that something like that would happen, where they would actually break it and pull you out. And I think it's so important for officers to, you know, explain the reasons. And I just don't know that that's going to happen in this area, especially if you asked.
Okay. Thanks. Second question, should officers give multiple opportunities for compliance before using force?
I think they should. Do they have to by law? No. If I say, Tracy, I have a warrant for your arrest and you need to get out of the car, and if you don't, I'm going to have to force you out of the car. And then you say, well, why do I need to get out of the car? And they say, I have a warrant for your arrest, get out of the car. And even though that's not professional, just they may have that lawful authority to get you out of the car. So just go along with it. And then you can complain about that officer, and it should be on videotape, and that officer will get more training or be disciplined.
So is there any reason why an officer would not want to explain what's going on before, like breaking a window and dragging someone out? Like I can't think of any reason why an officer would not do that, but is there some reason that I don't know about?
No, I think that, you know, and I think your scenario could happen. I can see it happening in I won't name any cities, maybe in different cities with different cultures. I don't think our culture of policing in this area is like that. So I don't think you're going to have to worry about that at all. But let's say that, Tracy, that there's a warrant for your arrest for armed robbery. Okay. I'm not saying there is. I sound like a very nice but let's say there's a warrant for your arrest for armed robbery, and it comes back where you're possibly armed. I'm not even going to approach your vehicle. I'm going to strategically pull up behind you. I'm going to get behind cover. I will probably draw my handgun out, and I will start giving you commands that, you know, to bring you back to where I'm at with your hands up, get you in a position of safety, get you proned out and get you handcuffed, and then search you for a weapon. I will bring you to me rather than risking the chance of me getting hurt up there or me having to hurt you up there. And that's called a high risk traffic stop. And we train with those all the time. So if it's something that big of a deal where it's big enough that he would pull somebody out of a vehicle, then, you know, that's going to have to be a very serious crime, and they're already there. But generally speaking, you know, I mean, there's always not usually always a never, right? I mean, somebody, I had long enough to think of a situation where this is a potentially very violent person. Maybe the person in the back seat, I know has been kidnapped, or, you know, I mean, there's so many different variables that could come into play. So it's hard to just say that nobody would ever do that. However, I would think if it's a high risk arrest that they would follow the procedure of bringing you back to them.
I see. So this applies to not just UPD's, Champaign Police, but how about U of I Police? Do they also go through the same training and advised to make the same type of judgments?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Okay, last question. Do you include any training from the perspective of the civilian or the suspect or the arrestee? Because you allude to many times saying that the police officer has just a split second to make decisions, but is there any training that's from the perspective of the civilian who just like the officers also have this tiny amount of time, also split seconds, to make a decision on how they are going to respond to the officers, especially in a time of I guess stress and panic when approached by the officer?
Are you asking if civilians could have this type of training so that during these situations where the split second decisions are made, or?
No, I'm asking
talking
whether
about, or are you talking?
The police officers, training for the police officers on how a civilian or suspect would feel, like their perspective.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, that's why when we realize that they're under a stressful situation, that is why let's give the high risk, you know, arrest example, you know, where I've got somebody that, you know, it's escalating highly, or maybe I even had to spray them with pepper spray. So they're really under stress if I just sprayed them with pepper spray because their eyes are burning and they're having a harder time with, you know, breathing and stuff like that. We don't want to just say, you know, sir, you know, get down on the ground. And then if they don't, we charge them, right? I mean, we have to realize that, you know, you're going to have to give easy to understand, clear commands. You're going to have to give them more than once because they're under stress and they don't understand. So what you're talking about, yes, we do train knowing that you're going to be under stress too. That's why we can't just expect if you don't do it, we immediately resort to hands-on or some higher level of use of force.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mikhail, just a clarification that I learned through being present with these trainings, and that is one of the reasons that we are doing less review of tasers is because every police officer in Urbana now is required to have a camera, and therefore there is a record. But even before that happened, I was amazed what patrol cars can pick up, both in camera and in sound. So I know that in Illinois it's legal to record a police officer, but you and I both have reason to trust that there are cameras at every second now with exchanges with police, and they should be both parties should be conscious that they are there, because before it used to be that a police officer could whatever. But when the cameras are there, and if there's 2 police officers or a car, there is plenty of recording going on.
Yeah, an interesting thing when body cameras first came out. I mean, back in my day, it was the dash cam, and I'm older, so they didn't have those then. But when they first came out, there were some police officers that did not want them, and it wasn't necessarily that they were doing things wrong. They almost, a lot of officers felt like, okay, so now I'm under a microscope with my administration and they're going to watch every single thing I do. And if I accidentally say a bad word or I just do something not exactly right, that I'm going to be disciplined. And then they felt like they were just, you know, but then I started talking to especially some of the older veteran officers, because change is hard. And they'd come up to me and say, Mike, you were right. He said, I had somebody come in and complain about me about this. I'm glad I had that camera on because it showed that I did everything right and they were lying about it. So it's becoming the norm. It's becoming common, and officers are like, yes, I want this videotaped. I can prove a lot with it.
All right. I'm just calling people in the order that the hands come up. So Dennis first, and then followed by Chris.
All right. Okay, hi, thank you very much. This has been a really informative discussion so far. I really appreciate the training that you're offering. When we look at the diagram that is created with the scales of justice, and on one side is actions that are done by the subject, and on the other side there are actions in response done by the officer, and they are progressively getting more serious as the scale goes up. I think that's a very useful tool. It's a very good diagram. And I'm wondering if there exists, or there can exist, a scale similar to that with de-escalation tactics, which can be used by an officer as the situation becomes more and more serious. Do you have I know you talked about scenario playing, which I think is probably really valuable, but you know, it would be really useful, I think, to have a graph or an image which you can share in your presentations in the public that also show that you've thought through various stages of situations that require more adept or more focused kinds of de-escalation wording or approaches which the officers are being trained to use. Because I think it would be reassuring to the public and would probably be a good educational tool. because what you present so far are steps to create and move into deadly force. And it would be nice to see the diagram that shows you the steps you take to avoid deadly force. And so I want to offer that as a recommendation to share with the public.
Well, I think you're brilliant, and here's why. I had one of the professors that I'm collaborating with on different things, and he had the same exact idea you had. And because we do have different steps and different things that we can do, and we have different, well, I won't get into the acronym of safer violations and things like that do kind of jive with that's an old word, isn't it? Jive, jive with what you're talking about. And so I think we're going to be getting together on something similar to what you're talking about. And when we start that, I want to give you some credit too. Maybe you can send me an email sometime and I can keep you up to date on it and get some advice from you.
I think it would be a really useful tool, and it would confirm in the public's mind that you have a plan, an organized method for considering how to avoid violence and to de-escalate situations in the public eye.
Right. And I'd be happy to present sometime on de-escalation that I've done in the past and how we teach it now. And then we, kind of work through to work towards something that your brilliant idea. So
it's a really important tool for all policemen to have. And I'm sure you're already training them with it, but it would be great to have the graphic. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. Chris, give me 1 second to unmute you. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Hi, my name is Christopher Hansen. I'm a resident of Urbana. So I've got a few things that I think are questions, and then maybe some that are statements that could be taken as questions if Dr. Schlosser wants to. So I guess from the side of a civilian, the impression I got from your presentation is that you've clearly thought about this a lot from the side of the police officer. And it isn't clear to me how much you've thought about this from the side of the resident or arrestee or civilian or citizen or whatever you want to consider that person. And a classic recurring example of this is every time we hear someone who is employed in policing is them talk about officers having a split second, to make a decision. And every time I hear someone invoke this statement, I find it so upsetting because it's true. It's entirely true. The officer has split seconds to make a decision. But what's also true is that the person being arrested or the person who has no training at all has a split second to make their decision. And the officer has received many, many hours of training and presumably has many years of experience in the force. And so it just seems so disingenuous to present an altercation from the perspective of the officer having only a split second to make a decision, when it is substantially more true and more meaningful to say that it is the person being accosted by the officer who has a split second to make a decision. And so maybe you want to respond to that and maybe you don't, but I'll go ahead and ask.
I can go ahead and respond to that, because if you ask me too much, my old brain won't remember it.
Good. No, that's good. Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, I guess when we're talking about officers having to make a split second decision, that's not very often, right? There's usually time. So sometimes the split second decision, let's say that I walk into a residence, they've invited me in, and it's a domestic situation. And as soon as I walk in the door, somebody, picks up a knife. And is it a knife? What is it? And I have to make a split second decision. But that's not very often, to be honest with you. That the split second decisions aren't very often. The majority of officers, the vast majority, again, I wish there was a national database, but it's down in the single digit percentages of an officer going through their entire career, 20, 30-year career, with ever having to fire their weapon in the line of duty. There's, split second decisions, but more times than not, there's times to discuss. I don't know if this pertains to what you're talking about or not, but I think it's also important to learn to understand citizens' views on this. And what I mean by that is every officer has their encounter, their story, their narrative of what happened. And something in critical race theory, there's things called, storytelling or counter storytelling. And I think we need to understand why people feel the way they do, what they think, what their perception of this was, so that not only hearing the police view of it, but we are hearing somebody based on a negative police encounter, so that the officers can say, okay, we need to understand this and learn more about this. But not necessarily relevant, but I want to get that point in.
Okay, I think that kind of leads me into my next question or point nicely. I want to point out that you mentioned, an officer may go through I don't know if you said 20 or 23-year career without ever firing his weapon. And I'm aware of those claims, and they seem to be right. And so I guess we could naturally ask, why does the officer carry a gun? Or why do we bother putting bullets in the gun? And I think that's a question a lot of people are asking these days. And you said that the officer is so unlikely to fire their weapon, but the other thing that you said during your presentation, you painted so many pictures in which the officer is so likely to need to use deadly force. And so here's kind of my next question. You described a situation I think was a real one from when you were just became an officer. And I think if I followed your story correctly, the basic moral of the story was perhaps through, I don't want to offend you, but perhaps through your arrogance or negligence as a new officer, you kind of put yourself in a situation that you shouldn't have been in. And the way I heard that as a resident was that through your arrogance and through your negligence or poor training, however you want to state it, you put yourself in a position where you may have had to kill someone. And you told the story, and the moral of the story was you would have been in the right to use deadly force on that person, even though he didn't have a gun. But the way I see the story, the moral I see, is that it was you, the officer, who created the situation to have to use deadly force. And so I guess what I'd like to hear you also have the CPRB keep in mind is the difference. And how did we get to the point where the officer may even ask the question, do I need to use force or deadly force? Because what I'm concerned about is the officer not being thoughtful enough such that they start to climb that ladder. And it's the officer's fault because they're the ones who are trained, not the citizen. And now we're at a point where, oh man, I have to shoot this person because he might kill me. And I wonder, this could have been stopped 5 steps earlier. So I guess, can you draw that distinction between arriving at the point of deadly force and what do we need to do to make sure officers don't insert themselves in a situation where deadly force is needed? Oh, and I'll give you an example. You mentioned a traffic stop. You pull someone over for a broken tail light, and someone could get shot in the face, as you said actually happened in Illinois. I don't believe that officer would have been shot in the face if that person, not knowing anything about the situation, if that person knew they were being just given a $50 ticket for their taillight and that was it. That person probably reacted with, a deadly force themselves because it was an officer altercation. And, I don't know if it was right or wrong. That's not really relevant. The point is the officer has kind of created a situation where there was a deadly situation, and that shouldn't happen for a taillight or whatever the reason is. So I'll stop talking.
All right. So first of all, yes, I own it. I don't know if it was arrogance as much as the way things were in 1985, and times have changed. When the culture of my department in 1985, when I started, you sort of had to prove yourself, right? And you shouldn't have had to do that, but and I felt like this is my chance to prove myself. Everything I did was wrong. I own it. The moral of the story is and then I thought to myself, okay, what should I have done? Could I have called the bartender? Where is he? Can I wait till he comes outside? I've got a description. I did everything wrong. And, and I'm a young cop, and I'll say, okay, arrogance at that time. I'll own that. Bad choice at that time, having to prove myself. But the training then that I had compared to the training we have today, I went to an academy and I sat in a classroom for 10 weeks and then went out on the road. And so, yeah, I'm definitely going to own that. As far as the officer that stopped the car for the taillight, the reason the officer got shot is because that person not only was wanted, had a hostage in his car that he had raped. So he did not want to get caught. And I think he'd already walked up and said, you know, the reason I stopped you was for a taillight. Turned around, the guy said something back. He turned around and I don't remember the exact details, and he was shot. So I think that puts a little more context into that particular stop.
Yeah, sure. And I admittedly have no idea what happened in that situation. I guess my
I guess I left out some important context.
No, that's fine. But it doesn't defeat the general point, which is maybe a person clad in, you know, some body armor and weaponry administering a traffic ticket is already raising tension to the point of this is a deadly situation. In the eyes of many citizens, it is a deadly situation.
Yeah, and I completely understand your point, especially in today's world and all of the bad things that are happening. I'm still definitely agree with you, while at the same time understand the mass number of traffic stops that are made. So many of them end up being an interaction where it's a positive interaction with somebody, and it's your chance to, you know, give somebody a warning or, you know, have a conversation with them. And while I have you here, is there anything else I can do for you? And the majority of those are positive interactions. But I'm not discounting what you're saying. Please don't take me as discounting that.
Sure. Okay.
I'm going to pick up on one part of Chris's question, which is that, and I think this is also what Dennis was getting to, just in terms of de-escalating, but I think Chris is asking about it a little bit differently, which is before we get to that situation where we're climbing the ladder, the deadly force or the use of force ladder, are there things that police officers can be doing to decrease the probability that we start to get in that use of force sequence at all? And you and I chatted a little bit earlier today in talking about this meeting, and you told me some reactions you had about when you found out about the Tamir Rice case. Sure. And that seems relevant in terms of how I'm understanding Chris's question.
Yes, so not only de-escalation, but strategy and tactics are so important. My awful strategy and tactics, based on young, cocky, arrogant, or having to prove myself because that was the culture at that time, I made a bad mistake. So when we look at the Tamir Rice incident, and I assume everybody's either familiar with it or they can Google that. When the officers pulled up into that park, they pulled up right to him. They got out and they went around and they confronted him right there. And let's say that, Tamir had a gun, but it was a toy gun. But if it's an airsoft gun, which it was with the orange tip taken off, they are identical to semi-automatics. And if at that time, and I couldn't see from the picture, so I can't give all the details, but if at that time Tamir reached for the weapon, started to pull it out, and he shot it, and it's like, okay, I thought I was getting shot at. That's my perception at that moment, based on the call that came in, based on all that. But we have something called distance plus cover equals time. It's such an easy concept to understand. So I pull up my squad car further away, and I get behind my engine block that can stop bullets. And then I start talking to Tamir. And then he says, no, wait a minute, this is a toy gun. He would still be alive today if that was the case. Bad tactics. So yeah. Is that kind of what you were looking for, Mikhail?
Well, yeah, I mean, just recognizing that, it all depends on what's the point in which we start to review what happened. If we start to review it at the point where the police make contact, then, our review in this case may lead us to conclude that, well, it's tragic, it's unfortunate, but, the use of force policy was followed. It was a reasonable, if again, tragic thing for the police officer to do. If, however, we understand that there were choices that were made prior to, the initiation of that contact, right, which is what you're saying, that that before they even pull up, they could have stopped at an earlier point. They could have positioned the vehicle. So like all these other things that could have happened. And some of those things are likely to be invisible to us as a CPRB. Sometimes literally they're invisible because we're not, the video that we're watching starts at a later point than that, right? And sometimes they're invisible to us because we just don't realize that that's what we need to be understanding in order to understand the stuff that comes later. So I appreciate the question from Chris, and I appreciate you telling that story as an illustration of that.
I put in a plug. I believe that's a beautiful way of putting the timeline, because the police do have choices. But one of my great feelings on this is that we do all these trainings under the public eye so that more people learn what the police choices are at a certain time in a certain point in the timeline, but what our own choices are. While I will spend a lot of time teaching people their rights, there is also we need to teach each other what the mindset of the other is. In the case of, most of us residents here, we're looking at the bulk of police work and saying these are bad incidents that are happening or that could happen. So here we are talking hypotheticals. The truth of the matter is that most interactions are not of the use of force type, and yet we have to prepare for them. From the police's perspective, they have to be aware that could happen, so they prep for that. From the citizen's perspective, we are also living that hypothetical that this could be a bad cop. When in fact of the matter is, most of the cops won't be there, and most of the people being pulled over will not be the ones with a toy handgun or any other kind of gun. But it's what rubs me the wrong way when we set up a rule, a general rule, because somebody broke some kind of protocol. The truth of the matter is we have to deal with that one person, but not make the rule that everybody's got to put their hands on the dashboard. But unfortunately, we don't have any other way. Rules are generalized, and therefore, because of those few cases, luckily in our town, but what else do we do? If we had another solution, I would be very happy, but I find myself being in the police review board thinking that one of these days there's gonna be a hard case in taser or use of force that I want to be trained enough to be sensitive. However, darn it, most of the cases of complaints even that are coming up will never reach that level of judgment. And I'm happy, it might be grievances, it might be impoliteness, it might be everything else. That's fine with me. I'd rather than the other, but we really in the back of our minds are all trying to curtail the bad actor in any part of our system, of our town, right? So thank you for that. That was a good insight. Thank you, Michael.
I think the general idea I was trying to dig at with my previous two questions is so long as we support the idea that when, say, an officer pulls someone over and walks up to the vehicle, if we support the idea that the officer needs to think that, oh, this could be a deadly situation, the corollary to that is that we have to fully support the idea that every resident needs to think that this is going to be a deadly situation in the end of their life. And you will never get rid of that balance. So maybe it's the case that we need to start going in a direction, since we all agree that most situations aren't going to be deadly or dangerous. Maybe we should assume most situations aren't going to be deadly or dangerous. And then citizens can stop assuming this situation might be deadly or dangerous for me. I just think it's a lose-lose situation for officers to say, or for our training institutes to say, or teach officers, every time you walk up to a car, you could die. It's true, but it's also kind of asinine. I don't know. So let me ask my next question next. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying, and we don't preach that we base things on you have certain way to approach a vehicle, certain things that you check and certain things that you look for. But we also teach that not everybody's the boogeyman. And I'll be quite honest with you, it's instead of officers, especially that they've been on for a while, they do not approach every car like it's a deadly force situation. Excuse me, I stopped smoking marijuana. Is this being taped? I'm just kidding. No. But really, we have what's called presumed compliance, because I will stop 60 cars with no incident. I will arrest 30 people and they will comply. And then officers have a tendency to be caught off guard, because the truth is it's my job. I do it every day. I stop cars. I write warning tickets. I write tickets. I arrest people. Almost everybody complies. I assume this person's going to comply. So it, believe it or not, it's you know, I have to give credit to a guy named, who wrote about it, Tony Blauer, because I think he actually trademarked that presumed compliance. But unfortunately for officers, it could be actually just most of the time the opposite of that, just making another stop. Even though we say there's never a routine stop, but you'd be surprised how officers are just making a stop and not thinking about their lives at all. It's just what I do for a living. It's my job.
Okay. I guess I'm going to make a recommendation to the CPRB, and my recommendation is maybe in Urbana we can do better than that, and we can say in Urbana we don't. The officer should be more likely to put themselves in danger than the citizen should be put in danger, because our officers wear body armor and have backup and have access to medical gear, and they carry tourniquets and everything. And I think that's not going to be something that Dr. Schlosser can, you know, say yes or no to, because he's speaking from a policy or a training perspective, but I'm speaking from a what do we value in Urbana perspective. And that kind of brings me to my next point, which is on our own use of force policy. So we have a police policy in Urbana that's some 600 pages long. And a month ago, I've been kind of pressing the council and the CPRB and Chief Serafin to make sure that everyone has access to that use of force policy. And we have access to some extent, but a lot of it's redacted out. And so this is, I'll turn this into a question for Dr. Schlosser, which is, can the CPRB do their job if they don't have full access to our police department's use of force policy?
I guess I would have to understand your complete role, and if that would be something necessary for you to have. And a question for Chief Serafin, which I'm sure if it's something that you would need to have, I've known him a long time, and I would think he would, if it's something that he could share or would share, he would have no problem doing that. So I would bring that up with the chief.
So it was brought up with the chief, and he said he said gave the same answer you did. There'd be no problem, and then it's been 5 or 6 weeks later, and apparently there is a legal problem. And I guess here, let me turn this into a question that maybe you can answer.
So it's probably something he's running through legal, right? Legal.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So let me turn this into a question you probably can answer. Can you maybe give us some level of understanding as civilians, what I guess without telling us the exact policies, why might it be the case that a municipality as small as Urbana, with 50 officers or whatever we have, why I'm really struggling to understand what is it that we can't know about our own police force? And when I say we, I mean the civilians, and apparently even the city council members aren't allowed to know what's in the police policy. And so my conclusion is that it's really, 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 really bad, because that's the only reason I can think to hide it. And so maybe you can try to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like when people want information about our training and the Police Training Institute, or they want to talk to me about something. There's certain things that I have to run through public affairs, certain things I have to run through legal counsel before I can do that, when sometimes my answer is, hey, I just want to do this. Let me do this thing tonight, and of course they're fine with me doing things like this, but there's certain things that it's higher up than me. And I don't know the situation with, Chief Serafin, what it is.
Okay, let me speak to the CPRB members now on that issue then. If and when you get full access to that use of force policy, and this also goes back to, I think Mikhail was asking Dr. Schlosser to give some more specific guidance to the CPRB, some more technical guidance. And I think Dr. Schlosser was hesitant because maybe every police department has their own policy sets, and the CPRB has its own thing going on. And here's a recommendation I want to make. We have a 600-some page policy, plus I think even more pages for the TASER policy. I think when in doubt, the CPRB should refer to a higher level of city values and Urbana values. And if there is a question of, was policy followed, or maybe there's not a policy on this incident, I want you to refer up to a higher level thing that says, not was policy followed, was this incident reflective of our values for how we deal with police in Urbana and how we want to live in Urbana as residents. And I just emailed the city council today, and I about the city mission and values, because it's not clear to me if we even have a city mission and values, but maybe something the CPRB can do is develop kind of your own list of values as a board. And if there was ever a technical issue in terms of policy, you could at least say, well, policy is unclear, but it's obvious to us that this incident was a violation of our values. And then maybe we could have some meaning from that, rather than always coming away upset that the policy wasn't clear enough or it was too ambiguous or something like that. So that's my recommendation. And then I had some other comments or questions for the CPRB in general, which I guess I'll wait until later, or if there's time, not related to Dr. Schlosser's presentation. And I guess the last thing I'm gonna toss over to Dr. Schlosser, and maybe this is something you can respond to, or maybe you can we'll just leave it as something to reflect on. The person who spoke earlier, Tracy, she described it as a hypothetical situation, but listening to what she said, I'm quite certain she was describing an actual situation of a person being pulled over and threatened, and the officers refused to identify themselves, and they wouldn't, tell the person why they pulled him over, and they broke his window and dragged him out of the car. I'm quite sure she was describing my arrest from 2015.
So Chris,
sorry.
I'm going to pause. I don't want to stop you, but I do want to pause.
Yeah. I can finish up. And the thing I want to tell you is that happened by the Champaign Police Department, and it was Officer James Clark that smashed that window and issued those threats. And he now works for the U of I Police Department. And so this stuff is going on right under our roof. And I don't know if I can construct sentences that indicate how upsetting it is that you, as our Police Training Institute head, would say, oh, things like that don't happen here. It just draws out so clearly how absurd the policing is here. We're so lost and so ignorant of so many things, and it's like people don't want to understand those things. So I don't know. It just maybe keep an eye on your own backyard when you go forward. I'll leave it at that.
Do you want to say something, Mike? You don't have to.
No, I don't want to neglect certain things, but once again, not that I believe or disbelieve things. I just, like I said, I would have to know the totality of the circumstances, and I probably just don't really have a comment on that right now.
I see one more hand, so we'll go ahead and take that one other, or possibly a couple comments and questions from Emily, and then we'll close and say thank you to Mike, and then we'll take some other comments to the CPRB if there are any. Go ahead, Emily. Oh, sorry. You're still on mute. Hold on. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Schlosser.
Hello.
My name is Emily Close. I live in Champaign, and I have a very specific question. You talked about, it seems like the goal of when you're preparing to arrest someone is to get that person under control. And how exactly will you handcuff someone if they can't be handcuffed behind their back? And I'm asking because we see plenty of videos where people are brought to the ground and they say, the cuffs are too tight. You're hurting me. You're hurting my arms. What if someone tells you, please don't do it that way. I have a frozen shoulder. I have torn rotator cuff. I have carpal tunnel. I have short arms. There's plenty of reasons why.
Yeah. Like I said, in police work, there isn't an always or so, you know, where most of the time we will handcuff somebody.
But no one ever addresses this.
Okay, we address it.
What you hear a police officer say is, your arm doesn't hurt, stop complaining, you know, you're being a drama queen or whatever. So I would really like a clear answer to that.
Yeah, so how we train is that the safest for everybody is for the, you know, is to cuff hands behind the back, but we say there is never an always or never in police work. And there may be a time where you have to cuff somebody in front. And they also make handcuffs where you can cuff somebody in front and then it has a belt. So you don't have to worry about somebody coming up and trying to come in behind you. And, you know, those things that can happen that have happened in the past, which is why it's the safest is behind the back. But if you have somebody that has, you know, certain
you offer those to people,
disabilities, or somebody's pregnant, or certain situations that officers have discretion. But I recommend, I don't know what department policies are, but I would recommend if somebody, if it's clear that somebody has, you know, some issues where they shouldn't be handcuffed behind the back, cuff them in the front, but also, you know, have one of those transport belts just to keep the hands secure.
Okay, I've never seen or heard a police officer ask someone, like, give them options for that.
Right. I mean, there have been incidents, but it's rare. Most people are handcuffed behind, but yeah, that's
regardless of what they say in terms of pain or limitations.
Right. And there's times where, you know, maybe I had to fight somebody and I got cuffs on them, and then I had to maybe loosen them up a little bit because they were still fighting while I'm getting the cuffs on, and I try to do it right away there. But then again, maybe it's in the middle of a bar and things are going kind of hectic, and I just would rather walk them out the door. As soon as we get out the door, then loosen the cuffs and make sure they're okay and double lock before I get them in the vehicle. But it is an option, and I don't know what department policies are on that.
The other thing is, I want to make a comment. You didn't really say anything specific about the language that police officers use when speaking to citizens. And I'm bringing that up because regardless of what you or I think about what happened to Aaliyah Lewis in terms of her arrest or how she was brought to the ground, I find it infuriating and absurd that no one will at least say, yeah, it probably wasn't those officers' finest hours when they told her to act like a lady and a few other things. So I think we need to have a better conversation about how police officers speak to people, especially since we all know that people have cameras on their phones and they can take them out and legally use them. And I know that they knew they were being recorded. I know it. So you talk about wanting to know what's in people's head, like when you do an investigation, what was the police officer thinking? Well, what am I supposed to think he was thinking when he knew he was being recorded and he would talk like that? I think he's not representing the police department or the citizens of Urbana very well. And the problem with an investigation is that they will probably be exonerated. But there should be at least a caveat that, can we at least do better with our language? Can we at least not talk to our citizens like that? Could we at least not lose our cool? I think that's what's really, I think that's what really is upsetting people. It's certainly upsetting me, is that there's no acknowledgement by anybody, including the police chief, that they didn't comport themselves absolutely perfectly. And that's what's so upsetting. And that's what I think people would like to tell to the police department is, can't you at least like throw us a bone and say, this was not our finest hour. We could have done better and we will do better. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Emily. I see your comment connected to the last thing, or the second to last thing Christopher was saying about, sort of higher values, and like separate from the question, which is obviously an important question of whether policy was followed, but separate from that, did people act in the ways that are congruent with the values that we want law enforcement to have in our community? So I appreciate hearing that from you. And I know you talk about this, Mike, with your recruits.
Oh yeah, we have, I would love to share the training, de-escalation training. I mean, if you guys have some evening where you would like to hear a presentation on the training that I do, I would be happy to present that to you.
Thank you. I'd like to take
I mean, it's not like you guys don't have anything else to do, but.
Yeah, I think we all have our hands full. And at the same time, I think the more we understand about the training that police officers in Urbana receive, the better I think we can, the better oversight I think we can provide.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, on any of my topics of expertise, I'm happy to present, anytime. I think these conversations are extremely important, and, where I'd like to be able to just transfer my use of force knowledge to you, I think I've at least planted a seed,
Yes.
like Kung Fu would say.
Well, on behalf of the board, I want to express my appreciation for you joining us and for graciously receiving and responding to our questions and questions from the community. Thank you, and we will, the board will stay on just a few more minutes and invite public comment about other things. And you're free to stay with us or say goodbye.
Well, I think, just hang on a second here. It looks like I might have to go. I think the Cubs are down by 2. There's still some game left, so.
All right.
All right, thanks for the invite, anytime, and good luck on your mission.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So if there are other public comments, we'll take them. We'll go ahead and turn on the clock if that's possible. And I think we can allow 5 minutes since there are not that many people here.
Mikhail, I have a question.
Yes.
Did you want to complete the agenda items that were deferred at the beginning or not?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Looking at the time. Can we do it super briefly? Like, is that, would that be meaningful, or are we better off just postponing it till the last meeting?
In terms of what I have to do, and the audit of the 2019 stuff, I'd rather take a little bit more time so that the public can fully appreciate, what we found, the changes that were made, and kind of start spooling into the 2019 annual report at some point in time. So,
okay, let's do this. Can we do a more in-depth report at our next meeting? But would you give us like a couple of minutes today, since I know there is an update?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks to staff, the matrix that I made is full. So in the portal, available to CPRB members, not the general public, are the original filings, the original responses, all time-stamped, the police internal investigative reports, and the findings letters that the chief sent out. So the package is complete. just in the context of what came out of my mind. And so I think the challenge of the board is whether that's what else we may want there. But a lot of text, many pages, hours of review of body cam for sure by staff. In summary, there were 43 points of complaint, 24 proper conduct as shown by the chief, 5 instances of officer consulting. And I would like to know whether in the progressive discipline system that UPD uses, that means that there's a filing for them. And I'm not sure of that. 13 were deemed unfounded. In other words, the points of complaint were not understandable or seemed that there were internal conflicts. And then 1 was deemed out of scope as it related to a FOIA. And so that's kind of the summary. This all went to CPRB members yesterday. I think I finally got around to doing that. So.
Okay, so I think maybe we'll put this as an item for discussion in our next meeting, and just leave it at that. Is that okay, CPRB? Okay. And then we'll go ahead and conclude with public comment.
Actually, Mikhail, before we do that, the 2 positions that are open at the CPRB, there have been a couple of people interviewed. We're looking for, maybe the next week. Well, in the near future, we will have some kind of a resolution with the people that have been interviewed. They go back to the mayor. And as far as I know, that's closed. This is an update, but aside from that, new paragraph, new page, Vasilia Clark's position will be open in the near future because we're losing her to retirement or something. But we will need staff support, and they're in the process of gathering that. So I think those are moving pieces that people should know about. We don't have it. I don't think we need to go too much, but I think it's important for people to know that much, at least.
Yes, and the other piece of that is Vasilia's former position as the Human Relations Officer is going to have a name change, but more importantly, is going to have it's going to become a full-time position rather than a 19-hour position. And so hopefully not only the CPRB, but other commissions and other parts of the city work that needs to be done are all going to have more support. And we're probably, I'm guessing, I don't know what the timetable is, probably a few months away before that position is filled. But hopefully soon. And we, on behalf of the CPRB, I want to express appreciation for Vasilia for all her work in filling in these last few months. She stepped in herself not long ago and had to pick up the work of Preston James. So we appreciate and thank you for your work, Vasilia, and wish you very happy retirement.
So I guess we're deferring all new business to the next meeting, A, B, and C, right?
Give me 1 second to look at the agenda right now.
It's great to have you, Scott. There is so many details that fall through the cracks otherwise, so thank you. As hard as it is to, make things longer, but
Scott, I don't see the new business. I was use of force training with Mike and followed by a Q&A with the board and with the public. Yeah. So I don't see anything else on the agenda.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and finish up with public comment. Christopher?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, actually, there's an echo.
I think I fixed that. Okay, I had it playing on my other screen.
Okay, you're good now.
Okay, so Christopher Hansen from Urbana. So I think it's good that you at least are having more frequent meetings, it seems, and I think this special meeting was good. And I'm glad. I was initially very upset to see only one public input session related to the Q&A, but I'm glad that you were thoughtful enough to make another time for general CPRB stuff. I wanted to kind of raise a few maybe newish issues. First of all, I think when the CPRB talks about having body cameras, you need to realize that almost no one can seem to get access to that video footage from a civilian side. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to the conversations at the city council meetings, but what the city is doing now is they're trying to charge people, hundreds of dollars up into the $700 or $800 range to get body camera footage for an incident where, a citizen or a resident rather was actually involved in that incident. And so the body cameras are basically useless if the video can't ever be reviewed. And you might say, oh, well, the police department can review them. And that would be a silly thing to say. History has shown that the entirety of police history, as far as I know it, has shown that the watchdogs, the overview of police activities, will be shouldered by the civilians, will be shouldered by the residents of Urbana. There is never a situation that I'm aware of where we have any reason to think that just because the police department has access to their own body camera video, that will make any difference at all. So it is important that the civilians have access to body camera video so that they can review their own situations and determine if it's worth making a complaint or a lawsuit or whatever they're going to do. And one thing that I've drawn issue with the idea that people can't complain after making an utterance of a lawsuit threat. And I know I even remember Ricardo was not happy about that idea. One thing that just occurred to me today was it's actually a little worse than that. Because I checked the ordinance and it says, it doesn't say if the complainant threatens a lawsuit. It says it appears to mean any threat of a lawsuit. And so what can happen is someone could be involved in a situation with the police. Let's suppose it involves a group of people. And if any one person in that group so much as utters something about a lawsuit, everyone affected in that situation has apparently lost the right to issue a complaint to the CPRB. And I think that's really, really problematic because essentially a third party can take away my right to file a complaint. So I don't know. I think we need to just get rid of that. And I think the way to look at it is like this. We need, I think this is true, that denying complaints in practice make them worse. Citizens are we're likely to have a worse police department than if we have those complaints and look at them. And so I think the way we should lawsuits. So might be doing everything.
It's not just you, Mikhail.
Oh, it's not.
Christopher, I'm sorry. Christopher, I'm sorry, but you're really inaudible to us. And I know what you're saying is important. I'm going to interrupt you.
Can you tell me where I became inaudible?
Well, unfortunately, you still are. Is it possible maybe disconnect and reconnect to us?
I'm trying that now.
Okay, hold on. Now you're clear. Are you still there?
Oh, excuse me.
Thanks, Scott. I thought it was my connection and I was going to relocate myself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it clear enough that I should continue or?
You can continue. I'll tell you where you left off or where I stopped being able to understand you. You were talking about video footage not being available to the public except the city's charging lots of money. And you were talking about a group situation in which a third party could get in the way of another citizen's right to file a complaint.
Okay, all right, I think I know where I was. I get the next point I was trying to make was that when we've talked about denial of complaints a lot, and I think the proper way to look at it is like this: when we deny complaints, the CPRB or the police department or staff or whoever's doing it, that is actually likely to make our police department worse. We should see complaints as free data, free product feedback on our police department, and every complaint we get increases the chances that we increase the quality of our police department. And right now we've set up this thing where complaints are like it's like a police department, it's like an officer versus complainant situation. And that's not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is here's an opportunity to make our police department better. And that will decrease the chances of injury, death, or expensive lawsuits to the city. So I think that's the proper posture to take. And then my next point is about the CPRB vacancies. And I have discussed this with a number of people, and I know I emailed Mikhail and Ricardo on this. I keep getting the feedback from people who might be interested in serving on the board that they don't want to bother because the board is so toothless, and toothless is their phrase. So I think, I know the chair, Mikhail, has made a statement that you want to see some significant changes. I think we need to push harder, and the mayor and the council need to commit to specific changes and actually list them out loud during a meeting. Let's get like the 4 easiest changes to a council meeting for a vote like as quick as possible, to at least just show that we're actually committed to making this board work. And then maybe you'll have an easier time getting people in those seats. And the last issue was about this issue of the board of the CPRB not having the training to vote, and the question of was the appeal in January valid? And I think on this issue, your response is entirely disappointing. And what it looks like to me is that rules don't mean anything. New rules can be made up and dissolved at any time by anyone, including the board and city staff. And you need to be principled, because that's the only way the public is going to trust you. So thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. I just want to echo, I generally approach complaints in the way that you described, and I hope other members of this board do. I hope the city does. I do see it as an opportunity. In some ways, the metaphor that I've used, and people have heard me say this already probably several times, I think the influx of complaints, and we have had a huge influx of complaints so far this year, in some ways is a way of running water through a hose to see where the leaks are. And I think we're learning where the leaks are, and I think some of them we knew were there, and so it's sort of like a reminder that yes, it's still there, it's still leaking, it still needs to be fixed, and other leaks I think we didn't know that were there, and now we do, and we're moving to address those, and I think we don't want to delay, but it also, rushing doesn't work, is not a good idea either. So I think we're all trying to move as expediently as we can, and hopefully people see that that's what's happening. I do think some of the changes that we passed in our last meeting, including waiving the notary requirement and changing the language in the complaint form, are a few of small steps, but I hope that they're seen as the kind of good faith effort that you are looking for, Chris. But either way, we know we have a lot more work to do, and we intend to pursue it. All right, is there, I see a hand, and I have to admit I was looking forward to ending the meeting, but we'll give you a chance, Emily. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, you were just seconds from a clean getaway.
We were.
This is Emily Close. I still live in Champaign. I just want to make a comment. You talked about the influx of complaints, but you are an appeals board. And so I had a related comment. I have availed myself of the FOIA process in Urbana. And my question was, I wanted information on the appeals that the board has held since its inception. And I asked because I thought there was 3, but the News Gazette has been writing that there's 4. So I wanted that data. And there actually have only been 3. And the dates are October 26, 2011, October 31st, 2012, and January 29th, 2020. So those are actually complaints that went to hearings before the appeals board. There were 2, October 22nd, 2012, that was canceled, and a second one filed in 2018, but it was withdrawn. So this is probably really picking a nit, but to me, 4 appeals in whatever, 11, 12 years is truly dismal, but 25% less, 3, is ridiculous. So I'm hoping that, I know you're going to be looking for a new human relations officer. I hope that we can put some value and emphasis on finding someone who's data-driven and a statistician, and will really maintain these figures, because I think they're very useful. And I think if we want to see complaints heard, and we probably do want them to be appealed, then it's helpful to have these statistics. So, all right, sorry to keep you, that's all.
Thanks, Emily. I agree. We definitely need to keep the data, and the data are useful in all sorts of ways. So thank you for, I was also under the impression that there were 4. So thank you for that correction. And now I have more accurate information. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
And we still need to vote.
Ricardo Diaz,
Yes.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Mikhail Lubinsky,
Yes.
Megan McGinty,
Yes.
Daryl Price,
Looks like Daryl had to go.
Yeah, he's been gone for a while.
Okay. Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.